Okay. Can everybody hear everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So tonight's shir is the last before Shavuos. So we're going to do part Yevamos and part speak a little bit about the holiday of Shavuos. Question is, what should we begin with, Yevamos or Shavuos?
I would love to start with Shavuos, but I'm welcome to hear other opinions.
Todir
Okay.
Kodem.
Started at Gemara. What'd you say, Andy?
Todir v'she'ena Todir Kodem.
Okay.
Is
So
Anyone
isn't that the halacha, Rabbi Rosesnweig? Todir v'she'ena Todir Kodem?
it is the halacha. The Gemara has a suffix in Zvachim and Tzadi Aleph Amud Aleph. What happens when there's a clash between Tadir and Mekudash?
Okay.
So that's the question. So but the Gemara has a very fascinating line in Zvachim. It's one of my favorite lines. The Gemara says, well, we could bring a raya from the fact that the Korban Tamid of Shabbos is brought before the Musaf. So that proves that Tadir, outranks Mekudash.
actually to
However,
argue,
Gemara,
we
just one
usually
second.
only do Shavuos, so it's Tadir. The shir before Shavuos is Tadir to do on Shavuos. So I would argue
Anyways, let me finish my
that
my
it's
line
Tadir.
here. So the
Sorry?
Gemara says that I like what you're saying, but the Gemara says in Zvachim, that's not a good raya that the Tamid takes priority over the Musafin, because the Gemara says Atu Tmide Shabbos Einan Kedoshim, by which the Gemara means that when you have a convergence of a Tadir and a Mekudash, it's very hard to separate them, because the Mekudash, the added dimension, leaves its imprimatur on the Tadir as well, meaning the Korban Tamid of Shabbos is a different Korban Tamid than the Korban Tamid of Sunday and of Wednesday. It's a very profound idea. So this is there's a very interesting. The Rambam says that this has nothing to do with Shavuos, but since you asked, the Rambam says that the din that a Kohen Gadol has to preside over the avoda of Yom Kippur applies also in a case of Yom Kippur Shechalios b'Shabbos, that he has to preside even over the Musafim of the Shabbos. So that's what the Rambam says in the beginning of Hilchos Avodas Yom Kippurim. So not all, but whoever talks about this points out that the Rambam doesn't have a makar. He has no source for this idea. Not so obvious, because the Musafim of Shabbos, one would think, are not connected to Yom Kippur, just a coincidence of the calendar. So even though the Kohen Gadol has to preside on Yom Kippur, doesn't mean he has to preside over the Musaf Shabbos that coincidentally falls out on Yom Kippur. So how does the Rambam know that the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur is also in charge of the Musaf of Shabbos? So the Or Sameach, in his commentary, says Ayin Bizvachim Tzadi Aleph Amud Aleph. Just look at the Gemara the one that I just quoted a second ago, which is that when there's a convergence between something that it seems to be like generic and something that is unusual, the unusual leaves its mark on the generic. So when Yom Kippur falls out on a Shabbos, it's not just that it's Yom Kippur, but it's also Shabbos. It's Shabbos Yom Kippur. It's like a special convergence of the two.
But we also know that there's a machlokas amongst the Tanoim. What is the most important pasuk, so to speak, in the Torah? I think
Right.
And
Right.
one of the Tanoim, basically, if I remember correctly, points out that it's the pasuk about that. I think the Korban Tamid, because it points out that the most important thing is consistency.
Right. So it's important to be consistent, and it's important for your consistency also to tie up with the unusual circumstance as well. So maybe we'll speak for a couple of minutes about Sfiras Omer and Shavuos, and then we'll go back to Yevamos. But both are good. Both ideas are very good.
Okay.
So okay, I just want to comment just very briefly It's interesting to note that in the Torah's presentation in Parshas Emor, I've spoken about this in the past, but here in Vayikra, we read it a few weeks ago, that when the Torah prevents Shavuos, it presents it differently than any other of the Chagim. Like every other Chag, there are certain obvious things and there are certain more subtle things about it. So the more obvious things, and then we'll see if we can justify breaking into the Talmud and the Tadir in order to speak about this. But the more obvious, of course, is that of all the holidays, the only holiday that doesn't have a name in Parshas Emor is the holiday of Shavuos. It doesn't have a date. It's the only holiday that doesn't have a date, right? The Torah says, "B'chodesh harishon ba'arba'asa lachodesh ben arba'im Pesach laShem, b'chamisha asa yom lachodesh hazeh Chag HaMatzos laShem." So and this is true for Sukkot, and this is true for Rosh Hashanah, this is true for Yom Kippur. We have names of the holidays. We have a date, meaning we have a day, we have a month and a day in all cases. And in each case, we have a mitzvah that is performed on that day that is unique. The bringing of the Korban Pesach, the eating of matzos, sitting in the sukkah, blowing the shofar, etc. The only holiday where there's no name, no date, not month, not a day of the month. There's no mitzvah, as we know. There's no particular mitzvah that you do on the holiday of Shavuos. All of that is true on Shavuos. The reference to Shavuos in Emor is in Perek Chaf Gimel. Just give me 1 second to find it. I'll tell you what comes before it in a second. Perek Chaf Gimel Pasuk Chaf Aleph. Ukrosem be'etzem hayom hazeh. No day of the month, no month, but just ukrosem be'etzem hayom hazeh. The Torah defines it by 50 days, the 50th day after the beginning of Sfiras HaOmer, and the bringing of the korban of shtei halachem, ukrosem be'etzem hayom hazeh, in the midst of that day, doesn't say anything else about the day. Mikra kodesh yeh lachem, kol melechas avoda lo sasu, chukas olam b'chol mashvosechem lidorosechem. So, in sharp contrast to all of the other chagim, not only is there no date, no name, no mitzvos, but it's almost like you encounter the holiday. It's almost like it comes on you without you even knowing it. Like what the Torah speaks about before that is, again, in every other all the chagim are introduced. Moadei Hashem asher tikrosam b'kroi kodesh. So, and then we're told the date when you're supposed to pronounce this Mikra Kodesh. But when it comes to the holiday of Shavuos, we have this enormous long section. I've spoken about this part in the past. I'm not going to get into these tonight, but starting from Perek Chaf Gimel in Parshas Emor in Vayikra, starting from Pasuk Tes, Vaydabar Hashem Moshe Lemor, Dabero b'nei Yisrael v'amarta lehem, ki savo el aretz asher nosein lachem, uktartem es kitzira v'avesim es omer reishis kitzirchem alakohen. So what you have is, starting from Pasuk 9, going all the way till 21. So you have 12 psukim that seem to be completely out of place in Parshas Emor. And these psukim deal with the Ketziras HaOmer, the cutting of the Omer, the Korban and the Tenufa of the Korban HaOmer, then the Sfiras HaOmer, which were in the middle.
That right away is an indication.
Yeah, no, that's how we know when it is, but that's different than telling you that it's on the 6th day of Sivan. Right?
I understand, yeah. Sure.
So the issue isn't that we don't know what it is, where it is. The issue is why is it presented in such a very different way. So
you said it once fast, I think that, I mean, the Shavuos is actually a connectivity aspect from Pesach.
Sure.
Yes, number one, it certainly is connected to
The
Pesach.
question is, what is the connectivity? Because, we have Sphira, but we also have Matan Torah, which was also a countdown from Yetzias Mitzrayim.
Right. No, all that is true, and I stand by that. I want to emphasize I think, a related but slightly different point today, and that is the idea of the relationship between preparation and the event itself. So, like the bigger idea, and it is connected to all the other things that you just mentioned, but when you know that there's a date and you know there's a name, right, and the commemoration is anticipated, with a lot of fanfare. So then everything zeroes in on the event itself. But what we find in the holiday of Shavuos is that 95% of the psukim are about the preparation for Shavuos, and then when you finally get to Shavuos, it's just boom, ukrosim be'otzim hayom hazeh mikra kodesh. It's almost like an anticlimax in some respect, meaning you've done the Ktsira, you've done the Korban Omer, you've done the Sfiras Omer, you brought the Shtei Alechem, you did the Tenufa of the Shtei Alechem, you did all of that. Ve'heinif hakohen osam alechem abikurim tenufa lefnei Hashem al shnei kavasim kodesh shiyu laHashem laKohen. Ukrosim be'etzem hayom hazeh mikra kodesh yelachem kol melechas avoda lo sasu chukasolim b'chol b'shosechem v'dorosechem. Meaning, even when you get to it, it's almost like what creates Shavuos is the preparation, not that the Shavuos, not that the holiday is a holiday because it's a commemoration per se, and therefore you have to prepare for it.
Which, by the way, is a good lesson in
there's
life.
some validity to that, meaning that the Torah doesn't need to be hyped up. Meaning, at the end of the day, you get yourself on a certain level.
Right.
Torah itself, you don't have to. In other words, accepting the Torah, you don't need to dance around. Like that in itself is enough. Like every other holiday has the Pesach or Pesach, whatever, or Sukkot is a Sukkah. Like Shavuos is the ultimate. Like you're getting the Torah, so it's the greatest gift. When you give someone $1 billion, you don't have to thank them for the ice cream or the drink. You're getting something that great. Like to me,
that's an interesting.
Enough, the Torah doesn't focus on Matan Torah.
Exactly. So if the Torah said Yom Matan Torah Seinu God Betzim Yom Hazeh Nesinas Torah, I'd say you're right.
By the way, is that any businessman or anybody will tell you that rule that the preparation is more important than the event is a fact. If you're well prepared, the event happens by itself. Is successful. Exactly. If you're not prepared,
so this is, I think, this of all. Let me say it this way because I think it's really true. I mean, we prepare for Pesach, of course. Shloshim Yom Lefnei Achag, and and there's a lot to prepare for in terms of kashrus and everything else, and so on and so forth. But it's all it's to get to that point and to be ready when you get to that point. But it's for the day. We know when the day is. We know what it's about. We know why we're preparing. And so on. Sukkahs also Shloshim Yom Lefnei Achag. You have to build a sukkah. You have to get the minim. Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, there's a whole Elul. There's Aseret Yemei Tshuva before Yom Kippur. But the longest preparation that we really have, and the most intrinsically presented as having intrinsic value, is for Shavuos, and that's why when you finally get, it's not we're ready and now we're ready. It's there because we're ready. We're not ready because it's there, if you understand what I mean. We're deserving of it.
Would you say it's almost anticlimactic?
It's not anticlimactic because in the end of the day, it's like Jacob said, it's the greatest moment in human history. But what's fascinating is that preparing for, let's just take a step back. What is it that happened on that day? So our Masorah tells us that it's the day of Matan Torah. That's what we say in Birchas Hamazon. That's what we say in Tefillah, Yom Matan Torah Seinu. But of course, it's very striking that we only know that through the Masorah. We don't know that through the psukim themselves. When you think about it, what makes all this even more intriguing is that the whole world was waiting for this day from the very beginning, right? The first Rashi in Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es haaretz. So we say the Rashi quotes the Medrash Bishvil Torah shenikra Reshis, and then when we get to Yom Hashishi with the Hey Hayadiyah, Yom Hashishi in Bereshis, what do you mean the sixth day? So Chazal say that the sixth day is a reference to the sixth day of Sivan, because that's the day of the giving of the Torah. And then the Gemara says in Shabbos, the Gemara adds that if not for Kabbalah Satorah, that day, the 6th of Sivan, the whole creation would have been canceled. Everything would have returned to a state of tohu vavohu. Wow. So it seems like we've been preparing for this day. And it is, when you think about it, it was anticipated to be, and it didn't disappoint. It was the greatest day in human history, because it was the day of Gilui Shechina. It was the day in which the Rebbeinu Shalom made his appearance in the world in a way that was undeniable. That's remarkable. That's what the world was waiting for. And it was a day of kolos uvrakim, right? Thunder and lightning. And obviously that has a certain significance. And what is it that the psukim say? The kol ha'am roim esakolos. So roim esakolos, as everybody understands, is a very astonishing kind of thing. You don't usually visualize kolos, right? You hear kolos and you see sights, but meaning that day, with the kolos of Rakim, and everything on fire,
they were like three-dimensional.
Was a day like no other. It was a day in which all the physical senses, were confused or heightened, so that people could really they could see the kolos. They could see the whatever that means. I don't know exactly what it means, but they could see the sound waves of it. It defied the normal laws of physics, clearly. And ad kedei kach, what?
So there is a strong connection between Shavuos and Rosh Hashanah anyhow.
Yeah, okay, for sure. But kolos of Rakim, I mean, we speak shofros. Yeah. But beyond that, let me add, finally the Ribono Shel Olam came to make his appearance, and he starts with the first, and this is what the whole world has been waiting for since the beginning of creation, right? And not just because we have a Messiah, because it has. I mean, what's the purpose of life, if not to touch or engage in, with transcendence? So, in every respect, the world is waiting for this moment, and the Ribono Shel Olam talks to, he conveys directly to Klal Yisrael, the starts with the Aseres HaDibros, and they can't even they can't even tolerate it. So they beg Moshe Rabbeinu, according to Hazal, they beg Moshe Rabbeinu to ask the Ribono Shel Olam to stop, and to use him as a conduit, so that the world, because they're concerned that too much Gilui Shechina will destroy the world, or at least.
And it was considered a correct thing by Hashem, that what they did.
Yeah. So the point, the bigger point that I'm trying to make, I guess, in all this is that there's a certain, I wouldn't say paradox. Paradox is too strong, but there's a certain pattern here that, on the one hand, there's of course, a huge focus on the event of Matan Torah and the content of Torah that was given, and like like you said before, that really eclipses all other things in a very real way. At the same time, all of that is not accessible in Torah Shebiksav, right? And instead, there was Kolos Uvrakim, and it was Roem Isakolos, and it was so, inimitable, that it wasn't even tolerable, for human beings, to fully, engage in the experience. All that is true. But the focal point for Klal Yisrael remains, not that moment, because they couldn't even fully enjoy that moment, but the preparation to get there. Ad kedei kach, that the Gemara has a very remarkable idea. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah and Daf Daled, and the Gemara in Yevamos, actually, on Samach Aleph Amud Aleph. The Gemara says that Moshe Rabbeinu added a day, meaning that originally the day slated for Matan Torah was the day before the actual event itself. According to many views, the actual day of the giving of the Torah was Zayin Sivan, not Vav Sivan, but it was supposed to be Vav Sivan. And then Moshe Rabbeinu basically asked for an extra day. He said Klal Yisrael weren't prepared sufficiently, and therefore, we should wait one more day. So can you imagine that? I mean, to me, that's just like such an astonishing thing. The whole world, since the beginning of time was, and the future of the world, whether it was going to return to a state of chaos, tohu vavohu, or not, all of that, depends on this moment, and this is the moment of meaning,
Moshe,
of transcendence, of Gilui Shekhinah. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, Ribono Shel Olam, we need one more day.
particularly from Moshe, who insisted Hareini Nokvadecha, I mean,
Right.
that is such an essential part of the relationship.
That's a great point. Yeah.
But it wasn't like there was a Shoshim Akbala. Didn't the men separate from the women to be holy? Like, in other words, you're talking about
That's part of the preparation for sure.
right? So I'm saying that there was something. In other words, let's say the men wouldn't have separated from the women. Could they have accepted the Torah? I mean, in other words,
they were supposed to be in a more pure state, so. And they
but
didn't want it to be.
Yeah, but usually we don't say that. Like, we're not like priests. So why is it being with your spouse makes you impure?
Right, but that's a separate question. That's not. I think because this was a time when all of Klal Yisrael would really, have the opportunity to enjoy some level of nevuah, of prophecy.
Right.
Being able to experience Gilui Shekhinah directly is
It's like why
is a
Moshe
form of
Rabbeinu had to separate from his wife.
Yeah, so in that sense, the idea that there were extra preparations and a higher level of tahara, that you didn't want to even chance that somebody would be literally tameh, because of any kind of marital relations or things of that sort. So the idea of that kind of hachana, just to make sure that the event wasn't going to be people weren't going to be excluded from it, makes a lot of sense. You're not suggesting that celibacy or or asceticism is necessarily an ideal, but for the experience of nevuah, and to take extra precautions, that there shouldn't be any kind of disqualifications. These were extra measures that were taken. But going back to my basic thesis is that the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu could remarkably hold back the entire purpose of creation, by a day, is more than remarkable. So, in a sense, this is a question that many of the Achronim ask, and that is, how come we celebrate the 6th day of Sivan if in the end of the day the Torah was given on the 7th of Sivan, assuming that that's the case? That's the
Isn't that a machlokas, whether it was the 6th or the 7th?
Yeah, but based on the Magen Avram in the beginning of Hilchos Shavuos really asks this question. He says, but it seems like we paskin that it's the 7th. So, and the Rambam seems to paskin that it should have been the 7th and so on, based on calculations of certain halachos. So
Yeah, but
the
then
idea
you have,
is,
Is
you
it
have a problem with then you have a problem with the 50 Yom. If you go to Zion Sivan,
right, so
then
then that's
51 days. So how
right,
does that, how
right,
do we reconcile
right. So
that?
that's a discussion too. Very good. That's part of the discussion. Okay, but if you do it on the 6th of Sivan, which is the 50th day, so then in some respects you're not really
completing?
commemorating the day of the giving of the Torah. You're commemorating the day before, and if you want to say it that way, the day in which, according to this view, the Torah would have been given if Moshe Rabbeinu hadn't held it up an extra day. But that's very strange because
Isn't the bigger question how Moshe Rabbeinu can contravene the date that the Rebbeinu Shalom set, unless you say,
no, of course.
unless
Why
you
would
say-
he, and how did he have the
unless you say
authority for that?
Tzaddik goes over Kodesh Baruch Hu Mekayim.
Right. So again, if you look at the Gemara in Yevamos, I mean, since we're learning Yevamos, it happens to be right here. So the Gemara says that he had
Samach Aleph?
what?
Samach Aleph?
Samach Aleph Amud Aleph. We'll get a little Yevamos. So we're going to turn to Yevamos in a couple of minutes.
That's
Anyway.
okay. Once we're rolling, let's roll.
Second, 1 second. So the Gemara says here on I'm sorry, Samach Beis Amud Aleph. 62a. Right, the Gemara says on the top it says the Gemara says Moshe midaite hu da'avid Tanya shlosha dvarim, the third line from the top, shlosha dvarim osa Moshe midaito. Moshe Rabbeinu did 3 things on his own volition, meaning his own logic. His schema daito l'das hamako. And the Rebbeinu Shalom said, you got it right. He agreed with him after the fact.
You broke the luchos, yeah.
Okay. Kirish mina isha, his separation from his wife, which he was criticized for by Aaron and Miriam, but the Rebbeinu Shalom said, Lo chein avdi Moshe, that in his case it was correct. The shiber haluchos, right? And also those are very remarkable. He took michtav Elokim and he broke it. He took the luchos and he smashed them, right? After the story of the Egel. Can you imagine that? Take something that was fashioned by the Rebbeinu Shalom that magically and miraculously, existed on both sides and contained, a microcosm of Taryag mitzvahs, according to some, and he destroyed it. And the third one is Vahosif Yom Echad. He added an extra day, right? So Rashi says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Amar Lo V'Kidashtem Hayom Machar, V'Hu Amar Heyu Nechonim L'Shloshas Yamim. He added a day. So then the Gemara says, how did he know what was the basis of his doing a thing? Pirush Menaisha Mai Darash, and then he explains it. Then it says, what about the Shviras Haluchos? How did he know about that? And then the Gemara explains it. And then they say, Hosif Yom Echad Midai to my Darash, T'chsiv, V'Kidashta Mayom Machar, Hayom Kimachar, Ma Machar Leilo Imo, Afayom Leilo Imo, V'Lailo Da'ino Nafikle, Shmamino Treyomi Labar Miha Idna, Imo Daito Ladas Hamakom, to Lo Shori Shchina Ad Shabta. So that's the Gemara. But it's still, the whole thing is very remarkable. And the question of the 6th and the 7th and which is the real day. So I think that the answer to all of this really is is very basic, but it's very profound. And it goes back to what we said. And in Parshas Emor, how come the Torah does not call it Yom Matan Torah Seinu in the end? Right? And why doesn't it give it a name and a date? And why is it make it
what is it
contingent
called again?
on-
Yom what? I'm sorry.
Why doesn't the Torah itself
No,
like
I understand the question.
mention
What is it called? Yom.
in Parshas Emor, it's not called anything. It just says Ukrasem be'etzem hayom hazeh mikra kodesh yelachem kol melachas avoda lo zasu. It doesn't have any name. Later on in Bamidbar you have Shavuot Seichem. You have a few Biyom Bikurim, but in Parshas Emor it has no name. It just says, and you should make this a Yom Tov in the middle of the day.
So how is it that it's called in the davening Zman Matan Torateinu?
Right. Exactly. How did it get to be that? It's not in the Chumash. When we say about all the other Chagim, right? We say.
I mean, it is Kabbalah Satorah, so I mean, I don't understand that question.
Right. No, we're only asking why do we have to know that only based on our Masorah, not based on the Psukim themselves? We know about the
Right.
nature of the other Moadim in the Psukim themselves, right? But the answer in all these cases, I think, is the same answer. It's all one idea, and that is that we'll take everything that everybody's been saying, because of the enormity of what was of the importance of the day of Yom Matan Toraseinu, right? It was particularly critical that Klal Yisrael not be passive recipients of it. After all, again, it was a day of kolos ubrakim, and it was a day of, roim esakolos. It was a day that was so formidable, and things were happening that were just so indescribable, in terms of the laws of the world, that their Rebbeinu Shalom, they had to go to Plan B. I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu had to beg him in the name of Klal Yisrael, to
Another day.
to hold back on the rest of the Dibros, to convey them in a different kind of a way. So it was exactly the kind of day that it was supposed to be. Because of that, Klal Yisrael, if the focus had been on that alone, then Klal Yisrael would only have been passive recipients. They would have been the audience of the giving of the Torah.
May I ask, Rabbi?
Just give me one more minute.
Okay.
I'll come back to you in 1 minute. However, the bigger idea is that the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted Klal Yisrael to take responsibility for Kabbalah Satorah, and he wanted them to be the responsible parties, to secure that legacy, and also what I call junior partners to apply it, in a proper way. So there's a very interesting line in the in the Haggadah. Everybody's familiar with it. Ilu kervanu lifnei har Sinai, right? Velo nasan lanu es Torah. We say dayenu, right? Which means ilu kervanu lifnei har Sinai. If we had been brought close to Har Sinai, velo nasan lanu es Torah, and we weren't given, but we were not actually given the Torah, dayenu, that would have been good. That would have been enough as well. So this is obviously a very perplexing statement, right? The main thing was Kabbalah Satorah. So what would be the point of Kervanu Lifnei Har Sinai, without Kabbalah Satorah? So there are different explanations. I mean, the Ramban, in his commentary on the Torah and in his glosses to Sefer Mitzvos on the Rambam, says that there's a separate mitzvah, there's a separate commandment to remember the events of Sinai, to remember the day of Matan Torah. It's a zachar, just like there's a zachar Amalek. You're supposed to remember what Amalek did to you. You're also supposed to remember the events of Maimon Har Sinai. That's part of, Ilu Kervanu Lifnei Har Sinai, the experience of Kolos Uvrakim and God's presence in the world. That in itself, in its own, if there was no Nesinas HaTorah, that already would have been extraordinary. That's how the Ramban interprets that. However, the Aruch
That's
HaShulchan,
the Dayenu thing, meaning if we just went to Har Sinai and didn't get the Torah, that'd be enough? Is that what we're talking about?
meaning at
Dayenu?
least because we still would have experienced Gilui Shechina, we still would have been in the presence of the Rebbeinu Shalom, and that would have been a meaningful experience as well. However, when we say dayenu, that means we're happy for each part. It's not, of course, it's much greater that we were given the Torah, right? But there's a very beautiful comment of the Aruch HaShulchan. Aruch HaShulchan wrote a commentary to the Haggadah called Leil Shimurim, a very long commentary. Anyways, the way that he reads the Dayenu is this. He says, Ilu kervanu lifnei Har Sinai, if Hashem had brought us close to Har Sinai, right? But velo nasan lanu es Torah. He didn't give us the Torah. He didn't make us partners in this legacy. He just, revealed the Torah, and we would have witnessed it, but it wouldn't have been given to us, by which he means as junior partners, as the Aruch HaShulchan explains. We have a rule, lo b'shamayim hi, ein navei rashay l'chadish davar me'ata, which means that, when there's a problem in halakha, in the, you can't ask a prophet. Moshe Rabbeinu was an exception because he was, he was the teacher of Klal Yisrael. But any regular prophet cannot be a source of halachic information. The Rambam is very strict about this, but it has its roots in the Gemara. Just the Rambam takes it further. Ein Navi, a prophet, is not Rashoi, permitted, L'chadish davar me'ata. He cannot use his prophecy in the area of halacha. Or what the Gemara says, Lo b'shamayim he, Ein Shomin, right, the Baskal. There's a famous story of, in the Gemara in Bab Metzia, of what's called Tanur Shalach Noi, where Rabbi Eliezer said, if I'm right, let the walls prove it, let nature prove it, look for a sign, from God, and so on. And the Chachamim very pointedly answered him, Lo b'shamayim, you can't do that. Prophecy is prophecy, and the halacha is the halacha. There's a certain methodology, and there's a system, and you have to train, and you have to study, and you have to invest in it. So the Aruch HaShulchan's idea is a very beautiful idea. It says, if we have been passive recipients of the Torah, not entrusted with its interpretation according to the right methodology, but we were just passive recipients, meaning we just were told what to do. And maybe if there were any questions, we could ask a prophet, to ask the Rabbanu Shalom what the psak is. So that would have been amazing also. But we were given so much more than that. We were given lanu as a Torah. We were made junior partners in this process. So that's, I think, why, if there had been too much, so what the Torah emphasizes, actually, is the preparation. It's the, the post-Pasach, it's the Ktziras HaOmer, it's the Korban HaOmer, it's the Sfiras HaOmer. And I've said in the past, the Sfiras HaOmer itself is a preparation through weeks, through days. Then comes the Korban Shtei Alechem. If you do all that, then boom, Shavuos is there for you, because what Shavuos is really about is the partnership between Klal Yisrael and the Rabbanu Shalom. So what better way, let me add, what better way is there to celebrate or commemorate that partnership than by the need to rely on the oral tradition? Meaning, what did we ask? How come we say in our tefillah, in our Birchas Hamazon, we say that Shavuos is Zman Matan Torah Seinen? But it doesn't say that in the Torah. It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah that Shavuos has anything to do with the giving of the Torah. How do we know that it does? The answer is through oral tradition. Oh, perfect. Of course, through oral tradition, because what we're really celebrating on Shavuos is not only or even primarily being passive recipients, but being part of the process. What made us part of the process? The methodology of the oral tradition. The fact that we took responsibility to receive that vast tradition and to painstakingly carry it from one generation to the next generation, to the next generation, to the next generation, and to pay close attention to the methodology of, how it is that we learn, halachos, and, to, follow that when situations come up, so that ein navi rasha lechadish davar me'ato. So the perfect, the perfect scenario is that the only reason that we even know that we're commemorating Matan Torah on this day is by counting, meaning preparing, so that boom, it's just on us, because that's the point. The point is our hard work and our commitment, to be worthy of this trust, of this legacy, and that the only reason that that is because of Torah Shebaal Peh, and Torah Shebaal Peh is the methodology that Hashem used to make us junior partners in this process. Remember that if it were not for the principle of Torah Shebaal Peh, we would get the commemoration of the holiday of Shavuos would be on a completely different day, because the Torah uses the expression twice, Mimachras HaShabbos, right? Mimachras HaShabbos was translated by the Tzedukim, those who denied the oral tradition and said, no, it's just what the text, the divine text says, Mimachras HaShabbos, meaning Motzai Shabbos. So for them, there would be a different day of the beginning of Sfiras HaOmer and a different day of the end of Sfiras HaOmer. It would start on the first Motzai Shabbos after Pesach, and it would be on a completely different day. So the idea that it's Matan Torah, the idea, of how we count it, and basically it's created by our hard work and by our commitment, all of that points in the same direction. And that is that the principle behind the holiday of Shavuot, and that for that reason, I think it's poetic. We celebrate the extra day that Moshe Rabbeinu, insisted on preparation, the 6th of Sivan, not the day in which it was actually given, because the preparation is really what made Klal Yisrael partners in the endeavor. So in that respect, you can understand the famous Gemara in Masechet Psachim. So the Gemara in Psachim on Daf Samach Chesed Beis records a famous argument between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua argue about what is the nature of a Yom Tov. Is the nature of a Yom Tov Kula Lachem or Kula Lashem? Meaning, is it supposed to be almost completely devoted to Hashem? Or is the way that you devote it to Hashem also by, engaging in eating and Suda, in other words, and other, physical activities, not secular activities, not that distract, but you celebrate, the holiday in a physical way, in addition to a spiritual. You go to shul, you hear Kriyas HaTorah, there's Limud HaTorah, but there's also a Suda, and so on. So generally, there's this argument between Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yoshua said, Chatzi Lashem, Chatzi Lashem, Chatzi Lachem, Chatzi Lashem, half and half, a balanced day. And Rabbi Eliezer said, no, you could choose one of two methods, O Kula Lashem, O Kula Lashem, Kula Lachem, one or the other. However, when it comes to certain days, everybody agrees. So when it comes to Yom Kippur, everybody agrees that, it's a day of Lashem. When it comes to Shavuos, everybody agrees. Everybody agrees what? That it's a day of Lashem or a day of Lachem? So if you had asked me and I didn't know the Gemara, I would have said, everybody agrees it's a day of Lashem. Why? Because it's the day of Gilui Shechina. It's the day of Kolos Uvrakim. It's the day of Kol Ha'am Roim Esakolos. It's the day in which the Rebbeinu Shalom finally, made an actual appearance, an undeniable, experiential experience, presence rather, in the world. So isn't that Ein Lecha, one would think, Yom Shekulo or Yom Shel Hashem, Gadol Mizu. But that's not what the Gemara says. What does the Gemara say? that even everybody agrees that when it comes to Shavuos, there has to be a component of lachem. Why? So the Gemara has like one line. Why? Yom Shenitna Bo Torah. It's a day of the giving. It's a day of the giving of the Torah. The day of the giving of Torah is the reason why it's lachem, or a day that it should be lashem. So the Gemara says that that Rabbi Yossi made a special Suda on this day. He used to have like special meat, and he said this is this is the most special day, right? Ilav Hayoma Kama Yossi Ika Beshuka. Not to this day. There are a lot of Yossis in the marketplace, right? I always like to translate it. There are a lot of Joes out there, you know. Everybody has their Joe, you know. So what does he mean? What does that Gemara mean? It's so strange. It's the opposite of what we would have thought. We would have thought that there's no bigger day of Yom LaHashem than the day of Gilui Shechina. But the answer is that all the preparation and the delay of Moshe Rabbeinu and the fact that the Torah was intended to be shared in terms of responsibility in a junior way, not in a senior way, but by Klal Yisrael, and that the only reason we even know that Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, that's a reference to Chag Matan Toraseinu, is through Torah Shebaal Peh. So that's what the Gemara is saying. Ilav Hayoma, that's what Rabbi Yossi was saying. I'm going to make a special Su'uda. This is something to celebrate on a human level, not just on a transcendent level. Because Ilav Hayoma Kama Yossi Ika Beshuka. There would be, meaning, this is a day for me to celebrate being one of the Chachmei HaMesorah. You know, investing my whole life in Limud Torah and Harbatas Torah, and that's very meaningful to me, you know, because this is what made me me. This is what gave my life meaning. Ilav Hayoma Kama Yossi Ika Beshuka. That requires lachem. That's the human element, you know. And that's why, if not for Torah Shebaal Peh, we wouldn't know that this is the day. But dafka through Torah Shebaal Peh, that's the right way to do it. Just like it's not the calendar date, you know, that's important. It's the process that brought us here of preparation, right? The 50 days, you know, from the Sfiras HaOmer. So all the psukim in the Parsha basically are about the preparation. And then when you get to Shavuos, you don't have a name, you don't have a date, you don't have a purpose. It's just there. But it is just there because that's the whole point. The whole point is you prepare for you prepare for Pesach, you prepare for Sukkot, you prepare for Rosh Hashanah, you prepare for Yom Kippur. But basically, right, the focus is not on the preparation, is a hechsher, we'll call it. You know, it's just that it's you know, it's an investment. But in the case of Matan Torah Seinu, it's more than an investment. It's really what we're celebrating. What we're celebrating is the capacity for human beings and for Klal Yisrael more particularly to live a life of meaning, a life of Torah, and to be part of that, not just passive, you know, observers, you know, and not just followers. Of course, also followers. Mostly the goal is to follow, but followers who have a stakeholding role in the enterprise itself. And therefore, the Torah in Parshas Emor really presents Shavuos in the most perfect way. And what it doesn't say is just as important as what it does say. And what it, you know, what we thought it should emphasize, but it doesn't, you know, is a clue to what its true nature is. So I think for that reason also, if I could just add one other point, the Gemara in Yevamos, so let's try to get some Yevamos in here, right? On Samach Beis, Samach Beis, you know, tells the story of how it is that Sfiras HaOmer became a period of mourning. Because remember, again, we tend to
Well, the
forget.
people that died,
What?
all the students that died, the students that died, isn't that obvious?
Isn't that
The
obvious?
killings, the students
I mean,
that died.
it's good that you know it, and so it's obvious as a fact. But what's not obvious is what is the remarkable transition that took place here. So let's understand. The Torah speaks about this period in Parshas Emor, which means that it all is under the rubric of a moed, basically. So the moed of Chag HaShavuos really begins from the second day of Pesach, as we discussed before, right? Andy mentioned from previous discussions. It starts from the Ketzira and the Havas HaOmer and the beginning of Sfiras HaOmer, all the way 50 days until Shavuos, right? That period was not a sad period. It wasn't just that it wasn't a sad period. It was a very, it was a quasi-moed, basically. So what happened? So you're correct. I mean, you know the story, which is good. But knowing the story doesn't solve all the problems. When you think about it, what happened? So first of all, the Gemara says here on Samach Beis Amud Beis, Amru, Shnei Masar Elev Zugim Talmidim Hayalol Rabbi Akiva, the Gives ad Antiparis. The Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of students, right? The Kulan Mesu bePerak Echad, and they all perished, right, in one tkufa, in one time period. Because they didn't practice respect with each other. They weren't respectful to each other. Olam shamein, and the world was desolate. Ad shabo Rabbi Akiva until Rabbi Akiva started all over again, which is also just imagine he lost 24,000 prize students. Instead of sinking into depression, and giving up, right? He decided to start all over again from nothing, right? So he went to Rabbi Shebedaro, the Shana Lahem, and he taught them Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua, the Haim Hamidu Torah, right? Osasha Tanikula Mesu Mipesach Hadatzeres. Okay. So when you think about it, Jacob said, well, we all know why it's a sorrow period, because the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva died. That's true. That is absolutely true. But when you think about it, it used to be a period of joy, right? So this terrible thing took place. It has the ability to turn, a period of quasi moed into Avel. That's a very remarkable phenomenon. The moed part was there first, so you might have thought, what happens when there's a mace on a moed? What happens?
We postponed the burial.
The moed is there first, right? So you postpone the Avel until the Shiva only begins right after the moed is over.
Even Tisha B'Av, which is the greatest.
Yeah. But here, I'm not saying it's exactly the same. I mean, it isn't exactly the same. And what happens when when a Yom Tov collides with an Avel? Let's say you're in Shiva and sadly, and then Yom Tov comes by. I had this with my father. My father passed away, right before Pesach, like 2 days before Pesach, and that was the end of the Shiva, right?
Disposes of the Shiva.
The Shiva negates the Avelos. So here you have a situation. You have like it wasn't a full moed, okay, but it's a quasi moed, and then Nebuch, the 12,000 pairs of Rabbi Akiva's students died, right? And then traditionally, when you ask most people about the period, we call it the period. Even the Sfiras Omer has like a sad connotation to it. no music and no weddings and and so on and so forth. There's a famous discussion. The Balamor in the end of Masechet Psakim asks, how come we don't say Shechayanu? Why is there no Birkas Hazman for Sfiras HaOmer? So one of the answers that's given, there are other answers too, but one of the answers that's given is, because it's a Zman of Avel, because the death of the students of Rabbi Akiva, which would imply that originally Sfiras HaOmer was accompanied, should have been accompanied by Shechayanu.
We also had the 1,000 years later, the Crusades in the same time.
You have what?
The Crusades occurred 1,000 years later in the same.
Yeah, I'm saying, but the implication is that it would. So it's all I'm pointing out is, yes, the Gemara says what it says, but it isn't so obvious that you would take a period of quasi moed, and you'd able to turn it into Avelis. Like, so what
Rabbi,
is,
can you please, I just took the Gemara out from my library, and you said Samach Bet, Amud Bet?
Yeah. Samach Beis is the story of Rabbi Akiva's students. Yeah.
Samach Bet in Yevomus?
Yeah.
How
What
far,
do you have Yevamos?
how far down is it?
It is about 2/3 of the way down the page. You see on the first line, it says Shenemar Baboker Zra Zarecha, the Gomer. It's about 6 or 7 lines before the lines start getting wider.
Okay, yeah, okay.
It says Amru Shnei Masar Elav Zugim Talmidim Hayalola Rabbi
Yes,
Akiva.
I have it. Yeah.
Okay, so what I'd like to add to all this, I'm not sure if what I'm saying is correct or not, but I'm going to speculate a little bit. Point number one, there's a little bit of a mystery. I always thought this, and then somebody told me other people say it as well, so I'm happy to hear that. Why does it say 12,000 pairs of students? Why does it just say 24,000 students?
If they learn the Chavrusa.
Oh, so that's a suggestion that I wanted to make, and that I've heard other people make as well. What's the significance of chavrusas here? Why is that so important? The answer, I think, is two things. When the Gemara says in Masechet Kiddushin, on Daf Lamed, the Gemara says, commenting on the pasuk in Devarim, es vahev basufa. So the Gemara talks about the Mochamta Shel Torah. That the battle for the struggle of looking for truth, in Talmud Torah. The Gemara says ha'av ubno harav talmido, and it's certainly true.
They said about somebody who was weak and somebody who is strong.
Say again?
I'm looking about one of the Meforshim, and it says here, חלש למד עם תלמיד הגדול ממנו. So therefore, if you double it, you have the 24,000.
Yeah, no, of course. We know there's 24,000. It's Zugos. But I'm saying, why didn't it just say 24,000? The answer is because the failure was on the level of the units of learning. It wasn't just that the students didn't get along well. They also abused in a way. This is what I'm trying to explain. There's a certain passion in searching for truth. It's called Mochamta Shel Torah. That's what the Gemara says. Vahev basufa. Ha'avu bno ha'rav v'talmido. Yoshvim. They sit, they learn. Nasim oivim zeh. They become enemies. Maybe they start screaming and yelling at each other about the truth. Mochamta Shel Torah, people get excited over things that are meaningful to them, right? But the Gemara says, "Einam zozim misham ad shenasim ohavim zeh." By the time they leave and they finish with all the passion, their relationship is deeper and more affectionate. Meaning, there's a certain, you can argue, especially when you care about, what are they arguing about? these small details of halacha, they're not small details. They're kiyem chayenu v'arachamenu. We recognize that this is what makes life worth living, right? It's the wisdom of Torah and the transcendence of being connected to the divine word. So that's worth fighting about. But when you realize that that's what you're fighting about, you also realize the bond between the two chavrusas, right? This is what they're fighting about because this is what matters to them. This is what connects them, is their search for truth and their mutual, love for Dvar Hashem and for a meaningful existence. And that deepens their relationship. That's what's supposed to happen. So that's what the Chazal say, that the pasuk in Tehillim, "Oz nidberu yirei Elokim," refers to chavrusas, people who learn together. And again, it's a very interesting thing. It's like a nifal, right? Oz nidberu. It's a strange, So they, it to an outsider, it looks like they're screaming at each other, but it's really a joint effort, to find, deep truths. Oz nidberu yirei Elokim. That's where the students of Rabbi Akiva, that it all went wrong. Instead of the lo zazim mishamat shanasim oavim zeh and realizing why they were doing it, and what it was supposed to bring them in terms of their relationship, it became just competitive and more like an ego game, I'm guessing. And the oivim part was there, but didn't turn into the ohavin. And that's what we mean. Lo nagu kavod zeh lazeh, meaning it became like a competition, to see who could outwit or gain more followers or credit. But that is not the way of Torah Shabbal Peh. If you have that method, if you see it as a kardamlach barbo, as a way just to get ahead, and you also don't realize that you have to have a community of learners in order to transmit the totality of the Torah from one generation to the next, which doesn't mean you have to be soft about your own views at all. You can be very passionate about it. But, you have to be respectful and you have to work together, even as, you're fighting together to discover the truth. So the calamity of Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim was in the zugos, in the pairs, and the lack of kavod, despite the fact that it should have been exactly the opposite. But what I want to add is that the fact that it took place, that they died in this period between, Pesach and Shavuos, maybe that wasn't a coincidence. Meaning it was particular during this period of time, which is dedicated to preparing, to be worthy of being a not just a passive recipient, but a partner in the process of Limud Torah. If that's what this period is dedicated to being, so the affront of Rabbi Akiva's students who got it all wrong, and instead of immersing themselves in a way that furthered that commitment, they instead turned it into an ego competition and so on. So that was what destroyed, in a way, the ideal quasi moed status of this whole period. Because what was I asking before? How did Sfiras HaOmer period, right, which is part of Parshas Emor, and in some respects it creates Zman Matan Torah Seinu, right? How did that, okay, so there were terrible things that took place, Rabbi Akiva's students. So, but they dafka had to turn this period into a Avel period instead of a quasi Simcha period? But the answer is yes, because this moed was completely dependent on the notion of Torah Shabbal Peh and how it is that, Torah Shabbal Peh is transmitted from one generation to the next. and what it takes and what attitude needs to underlie this junior partnership. Asher nasan lanu es haTorah, to use the language of the Aruch HaShulchan. So, my suggestion is that the abuse of this, the egregious, total opposite behavior or conduct of Rabbi Akiva's students took the kedusha of this time period, which was supposed to be devoted to preparation and especially to making them worthy of Torah Shebaal Peh, from one generation to the other. And this was exactly, the antithesis of that. And therefore, it, for the very, abuse of what it was supposed to be, it was even a greater avel, and that ended up characterizing, until the Binyan Beis Hamikdash and the renewal of the Karbanos, and everything that it goes along with it, that defines the period of Sfiras HaOmer. Okay, so I'm sorry we didn't end up doing very much Yevamos, but at least we got a Gemara Samach Beis, Omer Aleph, and Samach Beis.
Right.
Well, you said you were going to do half the class on one,
What's
half
that?
the class on. You said you were going to do half the class on one and half class on the other. Does that mean you're going to go on for another hour and we're going to study Talmud now?
I wouldn't do that to you, and I have an appointment actually in about 10 minutes. So even if I wouldn't, number one, because I hope I'm more kind-hearted, but since we did at least get a couple of Gemaras in Yevamos in, so at least I'm happy for that. So just to sum up, next week is the holiday of Shavuos, and we're in this preparatory period, which on the one hand, because of the story of the zugos of students of Rabbi Akiva, in fact, is treated as a very ambivalent, period, and has a very sad and solemn, aspect to it, at least, part of it in terms of, music and weddings and so on and so forth. At the same time, my suggestion is that, that it was acutely hypersensitive to that abuse, precisely because what's important about this period and what's important about the holiday of Shavuos is precisely the focus on Limud Torah and Torah Shebaal Peh, especially, which is what we do every Tuesday night, when we, we spend sometimes quite a bit of time on the details of whatever Masechta that we're learning, trying to figure out the different points of argument and, sometimes complicated cases, to unravel them so that we can better appreciate, the way in which they are solved and the underlying principles and values, behind them. When we do this, and hopefully we do it in a mutually respectful way, and there can be disagreements, which is fine, the Mulchamta Shel Torah, but in a way where we're noeg kavod zelazeh, and it's oz nidberu yirei Elokim. And by doing that, we affirm what this period is really supposed to be about and what makes Matan Torah significant. Not only the appearance of the Rabbanu Shalom in the world, which is extraordinary, and not only the giving of the Torah, which eclipsed, everything else, absolutely true, but especially Klal Yisrael's commitment then and the Dori Doros to be worthy partners as recipients in this process, to take responsibility for the Torah Shebaal Peh part, for the oral tradition, which is how we know that Shavuos is a holiday of Matan Torah. That's the most appropriate. Of course, it's only on that basis because that's what it celebrates. And without that, if we didn't have to rely on accessing the Masorah, that would be, an incomplete celebration of the actual holiday itself. So in Torah Shabbat, it just kind of comes upon us. The Etzem Hayom Hazeh, no name, no date. We know what it is, and on the contrary, we know that we've been preparing for it. So going back to our original question, like, should we learn Yevamos? Should we learn, is it Tadir? Is it Mekudash? The answer is even more than other things in a way. A deep understanding of what Shavuos is all about is a reason, to recommit to Tmidim Kisidron, as was said before. So even though we wanted to explain that, I hope we certainly weren't trying to undercut it. But the the most important thing is really to be steady and to be consistent, and to invest, and to benefit from the extraordinary wisdom and values that come from that investment. And Chag HaShavuos doesn't need other props. It doesn't need Maisa mitzvos, and again, its access and its significance through Torah Shabbal Pez is the perfect way, and the focus is Limud Torah, to stay up all night and learn or whatever. But that's really what Shavuos is all about. So I wish you all going forward. I did skip once. I think there was a question. Stephen Turner, I had a question, and I told him to wait. I don't know if he's still. I hope he's still there. I see his name. You can ask the. I wanted to finish up.
No, don't worry. Please, don't worry. Thank you, Rabbi. It was a beautiful. I had to leave for a few minutes. Thank you so much.
You'll catch me the question another time.
Okay, thank you.
So the one thing we do today to prepare for Shavuot is make sure we get the cheesecake baked.
The cheesecake tastes very good.
Oh, Rabbi.
The preparation.
Rabbi, I wanted to tell you two things. Nidberu today. Are you there, Rabbi?
Yes, sure.
Nidberu in today's Ivrit means that come to a conclusion.
Oh, yeah?
It's another as mamish the hefech to what you mentioned before.
Oz Nidberu Yirei Elokim.
As Nidberu, they came to a conclusion about whatever it is. That's number one.
No, that's exactly it. And they say that refers to chavrusas, and that's why I say it's a nifal, meaning it's not the they're not speaking to each other. It's the result of the speakings which they share.
They share and conclude together. And number two, once I was, I've been traveling to Europe backwards and forwards non-stop. I was in Israel last week too, and my wife asked me to tell your wife that she watched her on the JV
the interview
about Nechama Leibovich.
Yeah,
and my wife said she learned a lot.
Oh, thank you. I'll tell her.
I said, and I reminded my wife that we did meet Nechama Leibovich in Yerushalayim once, and it's wonderful. And I know somebody who converted to Judaism and took lessons with Nechama Leibovich, and she gave herself the Hebrew name of Nechama.
Wow. I'll tell my wife. She'll be appreciative of the feedback. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
So have a good Yontif, everyone. And I'm going to run because I have.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a good Yontif. Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to see you all.